ating alalahanin, panahon tayo'y inalipin.
Nangalan niya'y ating sambitin, paanong di tayo hinapin? Bayan muling magtipon, awitan ng Panginoon. Sa piling sariwain, pagliligtas niya sa atin. Bayan walang sawang purihin, ang poon nating mahabagin. Bayan isayaw ang damdamin, kandilin niya'y ating awitin, awitin. Bayan muling magtipon, awitan ng Panginoon. Sa piling sariwain, pagliligtas niya sa atin. Sa piling sariwain, pagliligtas niya sa atin.
Bayang magiliw, kelos ang sinanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisingin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bukaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdiningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are now starting our webinar on this perspectives on sustainable water for food security, health, and nutrition. But before we start, we have some welcome remarks from the Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, Dr. Philip Randy Tuanyo.
On behalf of the Ateneo Working Group on SDG 2, Zero Hunger, composed of the Ateneo de Manila University, Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, the Ateneo de Davao University, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Philippines, and the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability of the Ateneo de Manila, I would like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar on water and sustainability for food security, health and nutrition, productivity, W economy, and water, sanitation, and hygiene, or WASH. The webinar this afternoon seeks to explore the role of policy and governance in addressing issues related to water, food security, and nutrition, in uncovering insights and sharing experiences and perspectives related to water resources and its production, the aquaculture industry, and water and sanitation and hygiene in the context of SDG 6. To ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. The webinar is part of the series on the Ateneo Working Group's policy and governance of sustainable food systems and the future, whose goal is to raise awareness on sustainable food systems and its future as multi-sectoral and interdisciplinary issue. As you know, the Philippines had an undernutrition prevalence rate of 14.7% in the 2017 to 2019 period, which has been exacerbated by the economic lockdowns during the COVID pandemic. The recent inflationary prices of basic food items have resulted in further increasing the number of hungry Filipinos. Undernutrition, as we know, also has caused very high rates of child stunting, which has placed the Philippines in the top 10 countries of high levels of child undernutrition worldwide. This is the third in the series of webinars after those of the webinar on securing food, availability, sustainability, and access, which reviewed the importance of agricultural policy in ensuring that food is available to all, and on social protection and safety nets, which discuss the nature of income and social support in the country. The webinar today will discuss the importance of water in the blue economy in the context of addressing food sustainability in the country. We know that agriculture is the largest user of water in the Philippines, accounting for around 70% of total withdrawals. As the population grows and income rises, the demand for food is expected to increase, putting additional pressure on water resources. Sustainable water management in production can help ensure that there's enough water to produce the food that the people need, while also protecting water resources for other uses such as drinking and sanitation. At the same time, we know that water and sanitation and hygiene, or WASH, is essential for protecting human health and preventing the spread of diseases. WASH also plays an important role in sustainable food system. For example, clean water is needed to wash food and to process it safely. Sustainable water management can help to ensure that there is enough clean water available for wash, while also protecting water resources from pollution. We have several excellent speakers who will share their thoughts on these issues. And I'm sure that the discussion will be able to tackle these different issues related to water in food systems extensively. We are also hoping that implications on policies and institutions will also be discussed as well. Again, my thanks on behalf of the working group and looking forward to the excellent presentations this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dean Randy Tuanyo. And thank you also for that not only excellent opening, but also, in a way, an introduction to some of the issues that this afternoon's webinar will tackle. As already mentioned by him, we've been looking at the multi-dimensional issues of food system sustainability in a wide range of themes and topics. And so far, we've had about almost 20 webinars to date. And this year, we really focus on the issues of food security and nutrition, as this is, of course, a very important topic, and it's very relevant in what we're experiencing today. We can see that the issue of, for example, the price of rice in the Philippines has been stirring up a lot of comment, and it's been in the newspapers the last few days. And all of these are interlinked, as we know. This particular webinar is really inspired by both SDG number 2, which is on zero hunger, as well as SDG number 6, which is on water. And it is also coherent with this year's Global World Food Day theme, which is water is life, water is food. We have been working on the preparations for this webinar for the last few months, and we are very happy that we will be able to bring you a webinar which is going to be very rich in information and also in context, based on the highly experienced speakers we have today. As we all know, all of us need water. We as persons, as people, and all other creatures, the animals, for example, need to survive and live on water. We need water to survive. As a God-given natural resource, water has many uses, such as for hydration and personal hygiene, as mentioned, as well as nutritious food from agriculture and livestock cultivation, and also from marine fisheries and farmed aquaculture. Water is indeed a necessary ingredient for human survival and the environment. Food and agriculture require water to produce food sufficiently. Clean and safe water is needed to achieve human health, sanitation, as well as food safety. Just some things to remember on the issue of water. 3/4 of the world's water is made up of water on planet Earth. No? So maybe we should wonder, why is it called Earth and not called water? But anyway, that's what it is. No? And then 70% of the world's water is salt water. It's salty. No? Fresh water is only about 3% of the world's water. No? And these 3% of fresh water is found in swamps, in rivers, underground, in glaciers, and in snow. No? So we have to remember that that's only 3% of the world's total resources of fresh water. Now, of that 3%, more than 72% of this fresh water is used in agriculture. And about 16% is used for municipal and other personal use. No? And the remaining 12% goes to industry, no? Goes to the private sector for commercial uses. No? So that's kind of the breakdown of water. Today, we will have our first, let me just take a minute to introduce our three speakers so we can go smoothly. Our first speaker is Dr. Phil Torrio, who will speak about the conflicting uses of water for irrigation and urban domestic water supply from both the equity and efficiency, or the rural-urban nexus of water equity. Dr. Phil Torrio is currently the Associate Director for the Canada Bachelor of Arts program of the City University of Seattle. He has over 25 years of experience in the field of infrastructure development as a senior corporate officer, government official, and academic scholar. His teaching and research interests are in the area of resource management, governance, Asian conglomerates, infrastructure development, and public-private partnerships. As the first executive director of the Public-Private Partnership Center of the Philippines, he was instrumental in shaping the government's policy as regards the development of public infrastructure through private sector participation. He has a PhD degree in resource management and environmental studies from the University of British Columbia, as well as 4 master's degrees from the University of the Philippines, from the Asian Institute of Management, from Harvard University, and from the University of British Columbia. So his diverse work experience, coupled with various graduate studies, allows him to take an interdisciplinary approach towards teaching, research, and advisory services. I think you'll appreciate his input this afternoon, as he is a very seasoned person. Our second resource person, or our second speaker, if you like, is Mr. Pedro Bueno, no? Pete, as we fondly call him, who will provide a perspective on sustainable agricultural development and the blue economy. Marine fisheries and aquaculture development are critical for food security and protein nutrition. The potential for sustainable fish farming to alleviate poverty provides opportunities for small fisher folk for improved development of natural coast habitats and ecosystems. A value chain approach to sustainable aquaculture and development will contribute to increasing incomes for small and comprehensive fisher folks and the private sector initiatives. You will appreciate Pete's comprehensive approach to the issues He has been a professor. Professionally, his career has spanned many decades now, and I've had pleasure in having had a chance to work with him before. He started as a faculty member at the UP in Los Baños, University of the Philippines in Los Baños, and then got involved with the Philippine Council for Agricultural Research, and then went on to work with the Forestry Research Institute, now called the Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau. And then he found himself with the Iloilo-based aquaculture development of SIFDEC, which is the Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center, which has secretariats in various countries in the region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. From there, he moved to a UNDP FAO program or project, which was in the process of institutionalizing and networking various institutions in various sectors. He got involved with the fisheries sector, where they established the network of aquaculture centers in Asia and the Pacific, which is called or known as NACA. And he has been with NACA for a very long time, and became the Director General for NACA, and appointed by the Governing Council. He has worked, of course, in that capacity with aside from the actual government institutions. He has also brought in both the private sector, the farmers' organizations and fishers' organizations and other NGOs into those programs of NACA, and has had funding both from various multilateral, bilateral, and institutions, including the Asian Development Bank, among others. Today, he does a lot of consulting work for various agencies, but I believe mostly for FAO and the World Bank, as well as the ADB and the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, and then also previously an ASEAN-EU program for Southeast Asia. So that's Mr. Pete Bueno, who will talk to us about the second topic. Our third resource person, or our third speaker, if you like, is Mr. Kevin Lee from New Zealand, originally from New Zealand, has inculturated himself here in the Philippines, and has worked. And he and Kevin will give us a practical assessment and experience on working with local governments on water and sanitation and hygiene programs, or WASH, as we call it for short, as well as he has also worked in safe drinking water, looking at better practices, policy gaps, and his long experience in this field. He will be able to give you very interesting insights. He will take us through the entire project cycle and show us critical intervention points based on his long-term involvement in the issues. Kevin is the executive director and co-founder of A Single Drop for Safe Water in 2006, and president of Single Drop Consultancy Services since 2012. Both organizations working together to build capacities of government and communities for water and sustainable and sanitation practices and services. Also, he is a founding partner of Data Bridge Technical Solutions, supplying data collection, collation, and management systems for LGUs and other NGOs. Since 2006, his team has directly impacted over 800,000 people with direct wash services or living in defecation-free barangays, and working with government has significantly increased wash investment in 6 provinces and 1 city, in addition to 10 municipalities outside of those cities. Along the way, he has been recognized by various groups, for example, with an Echoing Green Fellowship in 2007, while the work and impact recognized with the Tech Museum Equality Laureate in 2010, and he was also awarded an Ashoka Fellowship in 2015, and winning the START Network's Working Differently Challenge in 2020 for his new barangay resilience and innovation through empowerment. So this, of course, has been led him to disaster risk management work, and he's currently based in Puerto Princesa City, no? So where he will be able to show us in his presentation various aspects of his work. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Dr. Phil Mertorio to make his presentation. Phil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ed. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me to be part of today's webinar. If I may, I'd like to share my screen so I can share my presentation. I hope everyone can see this, the slides. So my presentation for today is entitled The Rural Urban Equity Nexus of Metro Manila's Water System. It is based on a paper that I wrote, and it looks at equity issues of Metro Manila's water system as it relates to urban domestic consumption and rural irrigation. It is also looked at in the context of efficiency concerns in urban domestic water supply. So I think Ed has already mentioned that water has so many uses and so many issues. In fact, the water resource is the most difficult resource to manage and govern. It has so many uses. It's used for domestic water supply, sanitation, irrigation, hydropower, fisheries, flood control, navigation, recreation, and also for natural ecological functions, and many other uses. And it has so many issues on efficiency, affordability, cost recovery, financing, governance, privatization, drought, flooding, equity, gender, social justice, human rights, and other many issues. And as such, if anybody who's dealing in the water resource should be able to recognize these many uses and issues, and should deal with them in an interdisciplinary manner. If we look at the literature on efficiency and equity, the concept of efficiency, which is trying to get more output from the same input, has really dominated the discourse on resource management. It has failed to address issues on social justice and fairness. If you were just to take a look at it from the point of view of efficiency, it is overemphasized and unable to resolve current water supply problems. And the water supply has always gone to urban and industrial uses from the agricultural sector due to economic incentives and market mechanisms. And as such, there is a need to also look at social justice, equity, fairness, in order to counterbalance the focus on efficiency and markets. The equity concept, on the other hand, if we define equity, it is just the quality of being fair, reasonable, impartial, or just. And it is related to distributive justice or fairness in allocating water or providing water services, or procedural justice, which looks at the regulatory and participatory processes that ensure fair treatment for everyone. And the lack of equity or the lack of examination of equity concerns most of the time leads to significant conflicts, disempowerment of consumers, and even denial of basic human rights to water. While government acknowledges the concept of equity, its concept is usually ambiguous, and most of the time it is unable to address this particular concern. And if we take a further look at the equity concept, there's really no universal definition. It is influenced by so many things: historical, cultural contexts, circumstances, perceptions of people affected by water-related decisions, and there's a diversity of values regarding water. Some people look at it from a utilitarianism point of view. Some look at it from as a symbolic point of view. There are also religious implications, and it's a very big part of the values of people as far as lifestyle is concerned. It reflects the context of time, considers past circumstances, and also looks at the rights of present and future generations. And the perception of fairness or equity is influenced by conditions of scarcity or even abundance. In fact, if there is an abundance of a resource, then most of the time this concept just fades away. And inequities can be attributed to the imbalance in socioeconomic and political power, or it can be made, it does not necessarily have to be due to the biophysical reasons that there are no water available, but it can be due to socioeconomic and political power. And water scarcity can be generated through bias and discrimination, and not necessarily the absence of the physical form of water. So I'd like to take you to this slide and just introduce you to the Metro Manila's water system. So Metro Manila gets 97% of its water from Angat Dam. But this water is also shared with the irrigation supply of water for 28,000 hectares of farmlands in Bulacan and Pampanga. So from Angat Dam, for urban domestic water consumption, it passes through Ipu Dam, 3 big tunnels, goes into a settling basin in Big T, and then from there, it again flows into 6 big aqueducts to a portal in Novaliches, where it is, the water is divided further into 2, water that flows to La Mesa water treatment plant, which goes to the west zone, and also water that goes to the Balara water treatment plant for supplying water to the 8th zone. So Metro Manila's water system supplies about 4 million cubic meters per day of filtered water through 35 pumping stations, 25 reservoirs, and more than 10,000 kilometers of underground pipelines. Currently, it is serving more than 16.4 million people in 21 cities and 16 municipalities in Metro Manila. So Angat Dam is a multi-purpose reservoir which allocates water not only for urban domestic consumption in Metro Manila, but also for rural irrigation for the farmlands in Bulacan and Pampanga. And if you look at the history of the centralized water provision in Metro Manila, the first centralized water provision, in fact, in Asia, is the Carriedo Water Works, which was established in 1878. And over the years, Manila itself, or Metro Manila has grown over the years, and together with the growth of the population in Manila and its surrounding towns and provinces, towns and cities which constitute the greater Metro Manila area, the government has also implemented several water provision policies which saw the nationalization or the centralization of water supply and sanitation services for the entire country in one government entity, which was then known as the National Water and Sewerage Authority, only to be decentralized again in 1971 into Metro Manila and the local government water utilities. And in 1997, the government also decided another policy change, which was to introduce privatization in Metro Manila. And as such, from 1997 up to the current time, the water supply and sewerage services, sanitation and sewerage services, are being provided today by two private water concessionaires. And throughout these years, the government policy, which changed the way that water was provided to consumers, was because of the government's effort to look at ways to improve the provision of water supply and sanitation. And so it looked at different policies to be able to provide efficiently water supply to the consumers in greater Metro Manila, and as well as to be able to provide adequate and safe sanitation also for the consumers in Metro Manila. And like all the other water privatization projects that were done in the 80s and the 90s, the privatization was done because there was a need to improve the services of being provided by government entities. And if you look at this particular slide, you'll see that Metro Manila, compared to other cities in Asia, had very poor service levels being provided, had very poor water supply and sanitation services being provided to its consumers. Coverage was only 67%, non-revenue water 58%, which means this is water that is lost by way of pilferage and leakage, and water availability was only 17 hours. And there was a large staff per 1,000 connection ratio of 9.8. And you'd see, if you compare it to all the other Asian cities, you'll see that Metro Manila was really lagging in terms of the level of service being provided. And so privatization, with its neoliberal ideology, believes that the private sector or the market can provide better services for the consumers. And as such, if we look at the privatization scorecard, which is the scorecard used now to be able to look at the service levels of water provision in Metro Manila, if you look at this pre-privatization and post-privatization data, you'll see that there's been a significant level of improvement in terms of service as far as water supply is concerned. You see that the population served has grown by 125% from 7.3 million people to 16.4 million people in 2018. Service connections have increased by 190% from less than 1 million connections to more than 2 million connections. And was taken in 2018. These data are from 2018, so these numbers could be more or higher today. Water supply has increased only by 48%, but the two concessionaires have been able to provide more water to the population by as much as 125% from an increase of water supply of only 48%. And this is due to the significant reduction in non-revenue water, which was like providing an additional source of water supply for Metro Manila. And if you look at the water service coverage, it has increased by 37%. And water, where the networks are in place, the water availability is almost 24 hours with the water pressure of 7 psi, which I think now the targets are to increase water pressure to 14 psi everywhere. And water quality has always been of good water quality. And these are samples tested all over the water system. And so if you look at it from the point of view of service levels, there have been significant improvements in service levels post-privatization. And if you were to compare it to all the other water utilities in the Philippines, and also just to the water districts, you'd see that the performance of the two private concessionaires in Metro Manila are significantly better than the entire water service providers in the whole of Philippines, and also even if you just compare it to water districts, which are government-owned and controlled corporations that provide water supply and sanitation to different cities and municipalities in Metro Manila, in the Philippines. So if you look at Metro Manila's water privatization, it's a landmark water privatization, serves more than 16 million people, ongoing for 25 years, about 2.4 million household service connections. In the two private concessionaires have invested about $7.4 billion in investments. There has been a successful rehabilitation and privatization of a failed concession. The private water firms now manage and operate these concessions with local personnel, and the concessionaires have acquired new water contracts within and outside of the Philippines, elsewhere in Asia. And this water privatization is a model for other privatization and PPP programs. So in 2017, the two concessionaires, together with the officials of the Metropolitan Water Works and Sewerage Corporation system, they were awarded and recognized in Korea as having the best water privatization in the world in terms of improvements in service levels. But the question I pose before you now is this really the best water privatization in the world? If we were to look at it only from an efficiency standpoint, then maybe we can come to this conclusion. But there are other issues that need to be looked at. And at the start of my presentation, I showed you that there are several uses and there are several issues. For this particular presentation, I'd like to take an additional look at one of the issues, which is more on the equity side. So what are the equity issues involved in in the Metro Manila water system. Given that service levels have significantly improved, as can be seen from the scorecard that I have just shown. So what are the equity issues that need to be looked at? And whether those issues need also to be considered as part of the determination of the success of a water privatization project or any water project for the matter. So in order to take a look at these equity issues, I'd like to go back to discussing with you the situation in the allocation of water in Angat Dam, where we see that water is allocated for both Metro Manila water consumption and also the irrigation supply for farmers in Bulacan and Pampanga. So if you look at Angat Dam, it is a multi-purpose reservoir. It has a height of about 131 meters, and it has a storage capacity of about 850 million cubic meters. It provides 97% of Metro Manila's domestic water supply. Again, it provides irrigation water supply for 28,000 hectares of farmlands in Bulacan and Pampanga, which is about 22,000 farmer beneficiaries of the water that is being supplied for irrigation. And it also produces electricity and supplies to the grid, the national grid, about 246 megawatts, which is about 5% of the power supply to the Luzon grid. And the allocation of water in Angat Dam is being done through the operating rule curves. And if you see here, there have been two different types of rule curves that have been used. One before 2009 and the other after 2009. But what this rule curve just says is that anything above the upper rule curve, water is supplied to both irrigation and Metro Manila water consumption. Anything in between the upper rule curve and the lower rule curve, water is still supplied for both Metro Manila, urban domestic consumption, and rural irrigation. Anything below the lower rule curve, water is supplied solely for Metro Manila. There is no water supply for the farmers of Bulacan and Pampanga. And this may be because if we look at the opportunity cost, if we just take a look at the economic aspects of water that is in Angat Dam, you'll see that urban domestic water has a higher opportunity cost than rural irrigation water. And therefore, basing decisions only on the economic aspects of the resource, the natural tendency is to bring water to Metro Manila to supply urban domestic water consumption. And as such, if you look at the supply of water for irrigation, particularly for years where there is an El Nino phenomenon, or periods of long droughts, which are the years that are shown here, you'll see that there have been a lot of shortfalls of water going to irrigation. And in fact, in 1998, the value of the crops that were lost because of the El Nino occurrence and the water being provided to Metro Manila, the value of the crops lost at that time was about 1 billion pesos. So this water protocol, allocation protocol, has brought about a lot of instances wherein there was a shortfall of water supply for irrigation, and as such, the farmers were not able to grow their crops and they lost a lot of revenues. But under this current protocol, farmers are not compensated for any revenues that they lost because all of the water were given to Metro Manila for urban domestic water consumption. And therefore, I pose to you now these questions. What do you think are the equity issues involved in Metro Manila's water system, knowing that this is how the system works and knowing the allocation protocol in the Angat Dam, as well as the improvement in efficiencies in urban domestic water provision? So the question is, what are the equity issues involved and how are they related to efficiency concerns, particularly for urban domestic water consumption? So let's take a look at public sector provision. Let's go back in time and let's look at public sector provision. And this was the time when MWSS, or the Metropolitan Water Works and Sewerage System, providing the service. So the non-revenue water level was at 58%, which means 58% of the water that was brought into the system was lost because of pilferage and leakage. And it was higher than the level of non-revenue water for 50 Asian water utilities. And the average at the time for this 50 Asian water utilities ranged from 35 to 40%. So if we had even just brought the water and non-revenue water to 40%, there would have been 18% more water in the dam, which could have been used for irrigation requirements. As well, there would have been some more buffer stock for use during drought periods. And lower water shortfalls for irrigation helps alleviate farmers' hardships and losses during periods of scarcity. So what is happening to irrigation water that is reallocated to Metro Manila at the time of MWSS? Most of the irrigation water, in fact, if you look at all of the water that goes into Metro Manila at that time, was either lost because of leakage or they were stolen on the way to the consumer's taps. So this was the scenario at the time of MWSS. So what happens now? What after privatization? So we've seen that the non-revenue water level has dropped to 22%. There's a big drop in non-revenue water, which means that there's fewer leakage and also fewer amounts of water that are being pilfered. But the main question here is, although the system now is very efficient, is it equitable? And by asking whether it is equitable, we're also asking, is there access for everyone, particularly the poor households? If there is access, is it affordable, particularly for the poor households? And as well, what is the service level? Is the service level the same for all? Which means that there's not a different level of service for poor households and rich households. So these are things that still need to be looked at, aside from the equity indicators that we've looked at in the previous slides from the privatization scorecard. So is the water accessible to all? Is it affordable? And are the service levels of the same quality for all consumers? So if not, if the answer to this is no, then rural water inequity, which means inequity that is being experienced by the farmers, still persists, together with urban water inequity, which is inequity experienced by the poor households. Because what is happening now is reallocated irrigation water supply may potentially be flowing towards the taps of rich households if we are not able to answer the question of whether urban water provision is equitable. And as such, while efficiency is important, equity, the concept of equity also matters as much. Because if service levels were bad when the government was providing the service, then the water level, when the water was being lost, water reallocated from the farmlands, from irrigation supply, is being lost because of leakage, or it's being stolen because of pilferage. Now, if the water service levels have significantly improved, as we have seen from the privatization scorecard, if the water is not equitable, urban water provision is not equitable, which means that the poor households are not able to access water. If they're able to, it's not affordable, or the service levels have not been the same for all socioeconomic classes, then now we see the poor farmers from Bulacan and Pampanga, they may be actually subsidizing the rich households in Metro Manila. So I present to you the need to look at the concept of, or the conditions of equity in as far as the Metro Manila water system is concerned, because it only not affects the urban consumers, but it also affects the rural farmers who rely on irrigation water that is supplied by Angkat Dam, which is reallocated to Metro Manila during periods of extreme drought or during times of El Nino. And what are the implications for this particular situation? So there's a need for broader equity reviews. Equity research has not been as popular as efficiency research, and that there's a nexus that exists between rural and urban water equity. And there's a need to compensate the farmers during conditions of water scarcity when their supply is reallocated in favor of urban water requirements. And reallocating irrigation water supply for urban domestic requirements makes sense only when conditions of equitable urban water provision is present, which is still something that needs to be looked at. As such, these need to figure into policies that the government must implement with respect to water allocation in Angat Dam and water provision in Metro Manila. And by way of just concluding my presentation, I pose to you that efficiency really counts as what we have seen, but also the concept of equity matters. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. And again, I'd like to thank all of you, especially the organizers, for allowing me to be part of this webinar today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phil Torrio. It's a very interesting presentation, and we will remember that equity issues have really to be addressed when we look at the issue of water for all. In the interest of time, I want to move on to our second speaker, who is Mr. Pedro Bueno, who was former Director General of NACA, the Network of Aquaculture Centers in Asia and the Pacific. Pete, I know you have a very comprehensive presentation, so I give you the floor.
Thank you, Ed. I'm very pleased and privileged to have the opportunity to be part of this initiative. I find out it's very it's comprehensive. It addresses a lot of social issues, like what our previous speaker has just taken up. And now, so without much ado, I'll go into the slide presentation. Carl is going to kindly operate it for me while I talk. So Carl, where's the, okay. All right, so this is the title, the subject of the topic that was assigned to me or asked of me by Ed and Carl. Aquaculture and the blue economy. A lot of water involved, especially because the blue economy refers to mostly maritime resources. So next. So before we talk about the blue economy, let's have an appreciation of the bigger economy, which is the ocean economy, of which it is a part. It's really a simple definition. It's the sum of all the economic activities of maritime-based or ocean-based industries and the assets, goods, and services of the marine ecosystems. And so it comprises, well, many of these that are familiar with us, like fisheries, ecotourism, maritime transport, including shipping and ports, boat building, offshore oil and gas mining, exploration, and then what they term as the new activities, such as offshore renewable energy, harnessing the tidal and wind power for renewable energy, and including desalination, which they term now as freshwater regeneration, seabed mining, marine biotechnology for pharmaceuticals, medicines, and other uses, and then bioprospecting. And so what does it contribute? The ocean economy, the next, Carl, please. Just a couple of big data to give us an appreciation of the ocean economy. It's worth 24 trillion US dollars, including fisheries, shipping, and tourism. I think they didn't even include the offshore oil and gas. And every year, the World Bank estimates that some 3 to 6 trillion is the yearly turnover from the ocean economy, includes employment, the ecosystem services provided by the seas, and the cultural services like, tourism. Next. So we go into the blue economy. It is simply the sustainable development of the ocean economy. That's the definition of the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, mostly rich countries. And the World Bank expands it a bit. It refers to the sustainable use and conservation of the marine resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and more employment, while, which is the key, preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem. So you exploit it, but you protect. And the elements of the economy are the economic sectors like fisheries, aquaculture, shipping, and the policies that together would determine whether it's being used sustainably, like tourism, for instance. So there are policies in tourism where you reduce the so-called ecological footprint so that it doesn't destroy the environment, or it doesn't even impact on the social well-being of people in the tourism areas. And we'll go into that later. So next, in general, what are the contributions of the blue economy? So these are, in general terms, it has the potential to drive economic growth and create employment opportunities, particularly in coastal regions and in developing countries. It can contribute to poverty reduction, improve livelihoods by fostering economic activities that use and protect marine resources. And then second is food and nutrition security, focus on fisheries and aquaculture, which are vital for global food security. Both these sectors are now providing a big source of protein for billions of people around the world. The blue economy ensures that the fish stocks and the resources that provide the habitat to fish like mangroves, grasslands, coral reefs are not destroyed, so that they can continue to expand or be sustainable, at least, especially fisheries, because fisheries has of late, or not even of late, but how many years ago already, it has been declining. And much of that gap is now being filled up by aquaculture. Next. The third one is conservation of the biodiversity. So the blue economy would preserve marine ecosystems and protect biodiversity. So you can see healthy oceans help to maintain ecological balance. They support a lot of marine life and safeguard the fragile ecosystems like coral reefs, seagrass, and mangroves. Because of the global warming, coral reefs are dying. They're getting bleached. You can go to Google and see how much is left of the coral reefs. And the big barrier reef in Australia is in danger. So conserving biodiversity contributes to climate regulation, which is very important, sequestration of carbon and carbon dioxide, and the health of the marine ecosystem. And then the fourth one is it contributes to climate change resilience, and resilience to, mitigation and adaptation to the risk impacts generated by climate change. Okay, next. So now let's go into, just quickly, these values are there. You can go and Google it, but it's just a snapshot to give us an appreciation of what, in concrete terms, does the blue economy contribute. So here, 3.3 billion, number of people getting 20% of their animal protein from aquatic foods, all the way down. 300 million derive their livelihoods from marine fisheries and the value chain of that fisheries sector. 264 billion, now the value of aquatic food production from aquaculture. And that was in 2018, it's increasing. And for aquaculture, which our focus later on, this 106 million tons from aquaculture now contributes 62% of the food by people. Oh, it's expected that 62% will be provided by aquaculture by the year 2030. So that's a snapshot of the concrete contribution of the blue economy. Next. And so livelihoods. So 38 million number of people working directly in fishing, 21 of these in aquaculture. And as to gender equity, you will notice when you go to the markets, mostly it's women. Even in the aquaculture business, a lot of women activities, especially in seaweed farming, and even in fishing. So 1 in every 2 workers is a woman in the primary and secondary sector of the fisheries and aquaculture industries. They provide labor, but more than that, innovative ideas and entrepreneurship. I can quickly mention a Bimale Rural Improvement Club that Professor Valenzuela and I had the good fortune of visiting and helping in a value chain workshop and training. They started with a small production of milkfish in Bimale. Then they worked into value adding, simple processing under a mango tree. And then they expanded and developed a lot of bangos products for various markets in the country, and they've been planning to export. I think they might be exporting now, Ed. And now they have a big processing plant, of course, donated by the government in Binmali. They started with a few members. At that time, they even reached 135 women members in the community, 2 men members. When we were there, they were down to 85 women and 2 men members. So it's also a social enterprise. That's the Bimali Rural Improvement Club. There's a write-up of that on the web. Just a brief case study, FAO. In climate change, the production of aquatic foods has a much lower carbon footprint and far fewer biodiversity impacts than the production of crops and livestock. And seaweed itself helps mitigate some of the impacts, like it absorbs carbon, it absorbs some pollutants like nitrogen and phosphorus. Next. So now we've narrowed down to the Philippines. Okay, for context, in 2021, this is the GDP of the Philippines, 394 billion US dollars, and this is how the contribution of the maritime economy, 14 billion US dollars. The gross value added from fishing and aquaculture was 5 billion. And then the value of the production from fishing in 2021 was 3.5 billion. Value of production from aquaculture was 2.5 billion. And the product output from capture was 2 million metric tons and culture 2.35 million tons. So that's broadly the contribution of the blue economy, the national economy. I mean, just fisheries and aquaculture alone. Next. So what are our resources? I took this from a publication from Dr. Rodora Azanza and 4 other authors. It's called Valuing the Blue Economy Resources of the Philippines, produced by the Ateneo there with the Ateneo School of Government. So we have a sea area of 2.2 million kilometers, but don't tell that to Mr. Xi Jinping. A coastline length of 36,000 kilometers, one of the longest in the world. And our coastal waters are supposed to be 266,000 square kilometers. The reefs, we still have 26,000 square kilometers in mangroves, but this was an estimate made in 2005 yet. It's probably less now. But I don't know, because we've been reforesting and the government has put a stop to mangrove clearing for fish ponds. So I hope it has increased lately, more than, well, almost 2,500 square kilometers, and some seagrass of almost 1,000 kilometers. So that's the physical attributes and extent of the coastal and sea areas of the Philippines, where we will talk about in talking about culture, aquaculture. Next. Okay, so now the status, what are the benefits from aquaculture to the to the Philippine economy? So I just focus on the major cultured species like milkfish, tilapia, seaweed, and I think the Bureau of Fisheries also counts shellfish like oyster and mussels as a major species. So the others are shrimp, crustaceans like shrimp and crabs, groupers, which are still in small scale, catfish, carps, mudfish, and some other species like sea bass. Okay, so let's go into this. So in 2022, the export earnings from milkfish alone was, the per capita consumption was 2 kilograms from a production of 442,000 metric tons, valued at more than 17 million pesos in 2021, and decreased a bit because of, I think, the effect of the COVID pandemic, 15 million in 2022. Tilapia is being called the chicken of the sea, and now one of the biggest, the fastest growing aquatic food cultured in the world. We are one of the biggest producers of tilapia. So in 2021, we also produced 281 million thousand metric tons, and our per capita consumption of tilapia is 2.9 kilograms. So combine that. So just milkfish and tilapia alone, Filipinos eating 4.9 kilograms per capita, and that doesn't include yet the other fish species. In an export over a 15-year period, from 5 to 2019, I estimated that the revenue from the tilapia export was this 658.1 million. When shrimp, we are not as big players as, say, Thailand, where I am based. I've been here for 35 years, except for a few years in Rome. But we produce a lot of the tiger shrimp, sugpo, and much of that contributes to this 69,000 metric tons in 2021. And seaweed is our biggest aquaculture product. We produced in 2020 this amount of fresh seaweed with an export value of raw-dried seaweed and other processed products like refined carrageenan, semi-refined carrageenan, mostly done in Cebu, of 250 million US dollars. That's from aquaculture. Next, please. I would like to focus on seaweed because it has a lot of benefits, and because, well, not only are we the third or fourth biggest seaweed producer in the world, but seaweed has a lot of benefits to the coastal ecosystem and to climate change. So right now, there are 200,000 families and estimated 400,000 individuals engaged in seaweed farming. So that's a husband and wife, double there are probably some other employment in the family. And in trading, we have 400 industry players from the villages, the barangays, to municipal, to the provincial. And we have 16 carrageenan processing plants, 4 multinationals and 12 locals, mostly concentrated in Cebu. And so they provide employment. And right now, the area's farm is only 60,000 hectares, of the total farmable area of this 700,000 hectares. So that's the extent of the seaweed farming in the Philippines. That's why we are even importing raw material for the Cebu plants from Indonesia, which is the biggest seaweed producer in the world now. I mean, of carrageenan, the carrageenan yielding seaweed called Capaphycos and Eucuma. If you're familiar with that, in your ice cream or beer, your beer would not be that liquid nicely, or paint would be lumpy without the colloids from the carrageenan, from our seaweed. Okay, next. So these are the uses of seaweed as a food, snacks, a thickening agent for food products like this, binders, emulsifiers, stabilizers, paint, beer, ice cream. It is also used as a fertilizer, as a feed for livestock. In fact, livestock fed with seaweed have been tested to produce less emission of methane and nitrous oxide. So it reduces their emission. And they are used for a lot of other things, like many of your pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, skincare products have the seaweed colloid, carrageenan, and agar as their ingredients. Next, please. And here, next slide, please. And here is a very promising use of seaweed, making bioplastics out of seaweed. It's still expensive, but the technology is there now. I have been in touch with, in a previous project I was involved in with the World Bank and the GEF, where it will be sited in the Philippines, Palawan, and Vietnam. A company in Germany will provide a pilot plant to be sited, I think, in Palawan, to be put up there, to produce carrageenan pellets, seaweed pellets, that will be processed into bioplastics, packaging, cups. In fact, there are now cups where you can drink the water or whatever in that and eat the cup. And this biodegrade and become fertilizer. So it's a very important contribution, and will be a great contribution to plastic, reducing the plastic pollution in the world is a hell of a lot. And emission. So that's a very high potential. In fact, the technology is there, and there's some production now. So all these sachet, the plastic sachets, plastic could be replaced. If only 10% could be replaced by seaweed-based bioplastic, then that's a significant contribution to reducing the plastic pollution and emission. And land pollution, of course, because it takes how many thousand years for it to degrade. Okay, next. Next. So in summary, again, these are the benefits: food and nutrition security, livelihood, employment along the value chain. You turn waste to wealth, because in fish feed, for instance, there's a lot of materials that would otherwise be waste that the feed manufacturers, whether farm-made feed manufacturers or the commercial feed manufacturers, are turning into valuable aquaculture feed for fish. And the seaweeds and the bivalves, oysters and mussels, the others, can clean the water. Like seaweed, they absorb nitrogen and phosphorus and carbon, sequester it, and the bivalves filter the solid particulate. So they clean up the coastal waters. And like I said, the production of materials for industries, and then reducing pressure aquaculture can reduce pressure on wild fishery, so it can help conserve biodiversity and, of course, national revenue from exports, taxes. Okay, so generally, okay, now here's the evolution of aquaculture, development aspirations. So let's start with the basic one. So our farmers wanted higher yields, higher productivity, fewer risks, and of course, higher profitability. And then it evolved into having better market access, more opportunities for increasing revenue. And then the third one, equitable sharing of the benefits from fish farming among all the stakeholders. And then on to reducing environmental impacts of aquaculture, like the shrimp ponds. They have been known to produce a lot of environmental impacts from the discharges, and of course from external and having social. So throughout the years, the aspiration has evolved to include all these five, from a basic one of higher yield, higher profitability, to include all these five aspirations or goals. So how are we addressing them now, or trying to get to achieve these aspirations? Next. Next, please. So like I said, there have been the milestones in the development of aquaculture. We started with one and then progressed to all six, becoming an all-inclusive set of aspirations. Next, please. Okay, next. From all these facts and ideas, let's go into some more inspirational aspect. So what would be our mission? Our mission. So there are four interlinked goals. You have to increase and sustain the benefits of aquaculture, assure that the benefits are equitably shared, they contribute more to social development, and be sure that in doing all this, the environment is protected, the ecosystem is protected. So you have the resources, the values, and the sustainability objectives. Next. Now, these are just examples of systems and approaches that contribute to the aquaculture development goals. So I start with it's an old idea, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, developed by a good friend of mine, Frank Chupan from Canada. And it's nothing but integrating into one landscape, the shoreline, for instance, the coastal waters. Synergistic species that provide that are synergistic. In other words, you have fish, okay, and then seaweed and bivalves, and on the bottom would be, in some countries, sea cucumber. So all these valuable species. So they contribute some to the food of the others, or reduce the waste from the fish feed, and utilize them as for food, like the bivalves. And so that's called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. They feed on the same different columns of water, but contribute to it. So that's it. You can there are So that's an illustration of this system. The importance of this, or the value of this, is environmental sustainability is achieved through the mitigation effect of the extractive species. The extractive species are these: seaweed and the bivalves. And economic stability, because you have a diversified crops in the coastal area. So you reduce market risks because of such diversification, and because it's environmentally sustainable, there is a higher social acceptability. there is a new concept now called regenerative ocean farming, and this would fall under that, especially if you only use seaweed, bivalves, and sea cucumbers, and even polychaetes. So it's what is called restorative or regenerative ocean farming. Okay, that's the concept of this. Next, a desired outcome of an IMTA would be a better market access and a better price for the product, especially if you have it certified, because of the favorable attitude that it generates among consumers who are now very particular about environmentally sustainable and socially responsible farming or product of farming. So in sum, the goal of IMTA is to achieve sustainability of the environment, to mitigation of the waste, economic stability, and better management and socially responsible practices. So you can go to this, just Google IMTA, Mr. Frank Chupan, and a lot of this come out on IMTA. Next. So there are other production systems like polyculture. So a lot of more than one species in one confinement or like a cage. And well, it's not probably in the marine ecosystem, but integrated crop livestock fish farming has been popularized in China. When they had the integrated farming systems, they had carps, 4 species of carps in the same pond, chicken and pigs for the manure to produce the food for the fish, and even in mulberry. So you have the different crops in one farming systems area. And in Vietnam, a smaller scale called the VAC for garden, fish pond, and livestock. It's the same concept. They are the same. Okay. So next, there are other systems like recirculating aquaculture, aquaponics. They are getting very common now, especially aquaponics, and this can be scaled up so that it can even be done in a home. I've seen one when I was in Bahamas. I've seen one in big one in a school and a small one in a house. Okay, aquaponics, vegetables, and or strawberries and fish, tilapia usually. Next. Next, Carl. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, there is this marine protected areas. We have so many in the Philippines. I was surprised when I started looking up the marine. We have the biggest one in the Philippines in Cagayan that has 1 million hectares declared as a marine protected area. Fishing is limit restricted, and you can only do sort of restorative aquaculture, not the ones that produce a lot of discharge in this marine protected area. And so there are now a lot in the Philippines. I think more than 400 to 500, and they usually are declared by the municipal government. Next, so these are a strategic purchase now. And now for the last segment of our talk, I'd like to talk about social enterprise for social equity. So cooperatives would be social enterprises. Even associations like the one I mentioned in Bimali, it's a business with specific social objectives. They produce profit, but the objective is to use that the benefits that are accrued for social change or for social causes. So still maximizing profit, while it's not the primary goal, it is an objective. It's different from social innovation, where social innovation is a process. And unlike a charity, they pursue endeavors that generate revenues, which then fund their social causes like cleaner water, better health system in the community, or more employment of the women in the community. They can obtain funds from philanthropy, but then later on they can be self-sustaining because they're a business. Okay, this is one reading matter for on social enterprise in the Philippines. Next. And these are the areas where a social enterprise can go into business, like development of broodstock, the mother and father fish, producing the fry for selling to the farmers, making farm-made feeds, turning a lot of waste from the kitchen and from fruit trees into useful or aqua feed for, and of course in farming itself, processing, marketing, all through this value chain, from broodstock development all the way to marketing, packaging, and value adding, like that Mali Rural Improvement Club is doing. Next. So it has to be okay. Now let's go into good governance. What are the aspects of it? You have regulations, mandatory. Then you have the market-based governance system, like eco-labels, certification standards, social standards of social and voluntary responsibility, like eco-labels. Then you have the voluntary, so good management practices, codes of conduct, codes of practices that are voluntarily complied to or adhered to by the farmers. Then of course you provide capacity building to be able to, for the farmers or the ones regulated or governed, to adhere or comply with all this. Okay, and of course also the capacity of the institutions doing the management of the sector, the governors, to enforce regulations and encourage the adoption of the market-based standards. And like I said, capacity of the governed to comply with the regulations and adhere to these market-based and voluntary governance mechanisms. Next, please. Okay, this would probably be the final one, because the next one would be on the relevance of all this of aquaculture to climate change, to the SDGs. But I'd like to just emphasize this. So these are the pillars of national aquaculture development: an equitable social development, a sustainable economic development, and ecological health and biodiversity, supported by a strong governance mechanism, strong institutional support. So let's see how it goes. Okay, so we have these goals. The social goal would be to enhance the health and well-being of the people through the production of nutritious food and development of productive and secure livelihoods. The economic goal would be to stimulate more economic activities in rural areas, create employment opportunities, raise rural income households, and then of course earn income for the country. And ecological would be to promote the conservation of aquatic biodiversity, enhancement of genetic resources, conservation of natural resources, and ecological resilience to all forms of risks. And these are supported or enabled by an enabling environment, policies, rules, regulations, and all the things I said a while ago. To effectively manage the sector, provide support services like R&D, technology, innovations, technical advice, information, markets, sustainable and responsible development, and to help facilitate an equitable sharing of the benefits. Next. And how are they linked? So here, social stability and equity are requisites of a conducive social climate, which then encourages investments in economic development, in business, and in environmental management. On the other hand, an economically developed community really tends to pay more attention and allocate more of their resources to improving their environment. And economic development fosters social stability and may even encourage equity. On the third one, you have healthy and resilient ecological systems this can better support economic development and contribute to social resilience. So then you have effective governance to underpin all this: social accountability, orderly and equitable economic development, and ecological protection. So that's how they are linked when we set up our objective for aquaculture development. Next, please. Okay, so just a snapshot of the businesses that are being that can be for the contribution to livelihood and food and nutrition of aquaculture fisheries, aquaculture especially. Next. But we have a lot of problems, issues, threats. So one, well, we are vulnerable to typhoons. And now the warming climate, warming waters. And so if we ignore these threats, then investments will be discouraged. You will bring in investors for social enterprises or businesses based on maritime resources like marine aquaculture, seaweed aquaculture. Then you have destructive fishing. They destroy the reefs. They destroy the fishery. I mean, the biodiversity by killing even the small fry with nothing to replace the fish in the ocean. So that's why you have this strong international agreements now against IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And this one is quite important. Poorly managed tourism that usually exceed carrying capacity of a site. And so this can inflict what economists call negative externalities on the resources and the beneficiaries, the people. Example would be the destruction of pristine sites from too much human presence or a large ecological footprint. And even worse, the marginalization of the local people when the powerful and the rich come in to develop rural-based enterprises and tourism resorts. And you might sometimes, to have the economy of scale, you might say it might improve the efficiency of resource use. But then, on the other hand, you might exclude the small, poor rural people from the development process, or they might lose ownership or rights to the resources of the coastal areas or the ocean resources. And another one is the debasement of local traditions and culture. So all these are threats from development itself. So it has to be well regulated and well managed. Next, please. I think I will. This really just sums up, provides some guidelines on governance of nearshore aquaculture. I think Ed and the organizers will print this out and provide the copies to you. So I will not go into this now, but you have to have a good, enabling environment for the sustainable conduct and expansion of nearshore aquaculture. Nearshore aquaculture means having cages nearshore. Offshore, we still have not many because it's costly, and you even have the additional use of powered motorboats, which of course emits carbon dioxide. Next. So these are some of the guidelines for governing. So all this, research and innovation, engage with local communities, establish cooperation with other countries, strengthen the monitoring and enforcement of rules and regulations. So these are guidelines. So I won't go much into this. We have already established the importance of agriculture to the economy, to the social development, and to ecological health. Next, please. Now, this one would introduce the next series of top slides based on the relevance of aquaculture to the SDGs, to some of the sustainable development goals, like no poverty. So you have gainful employment, livelihood opportunities along the value chain of aquaculture. And zero hunger, of course, we're producing nutritious food, not only food, but nutritious food, seafood, with a lot of omega-3, lipids, all the necessary minerals. And then related to that would be good health. And then gender equality, as we have said, 1 in 2 in the chain is a woman, provide a lot of decision-making ideas like this: processing, marketing, credit access, and income disbursement. I know this. Half of the household is a woman, and she does all that. And then the creation of rural-based enterprises along the value chain to create employment. Prospects of developing social enterprises run by farmer cooperatives, associations, and mutuals. Then 12, responsible consumption and production, because we have certification, eco-labeling, codes of practice for good agriculture management. So these are the ones that contribute to responsible production. And then, as we have said at the beginning, less energy spent and less emission emitted by production of protein food in the sea than production of livestock. And just as well, seaweed and bivalves clean the coastal waste. Seaweed absorb carbon. IMT reduces waste and increases efficiency of the natural food in the sea, in the water, and the artificial feed. And seaweed-fed ruminants emit less nitrous oxide and methane. And then, of course, the last one, because you're producing a lot of fish by culture, then it relieves pressure on capture fishery. Okay? And I think that's the last. Okay. So, a happy Fishermen's Association harvesting a big. Unfortunately, this picture from FAO is not about marine fish, it's carps in China. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to work on this so that I can share some of that knowledge with you, and a privilege to be involved somehow in this initiative. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mr. Pete Bueno, Mr. Pedro Bueno. Very comprehensive treatment on the subject of sustainable aquaculture and the blue economy. Maraming salamat. For our third speaker this afternoon, we'd like to call on Mr. Kevin Lee, who has really been working with the empowerment of communities in WASH issues. So, Kevin, can I give you the floor? Kevin?
Yeah, hi, how's it going? I'll see if I can share this.
Thanks.
I hope, Miss Anna, you capture my accent. So we'll see how it goes. Is that full screen? Yep. So water is life. That's what everybody says. But in reality, it's not that important. It doesn't seem that important to people. So we complain about the cost of water, but think about it. If you looked at the first presentation, people pipe, they collect water, they treat water, they pipe it to your house for 300 pesos for 10 cubic meters. Like that's not a lot of money for that amount of service. We have a very different way of looking at water. We don't really care. So for example, we buy bottled water or we get water from refilling stations, even though that very cheap processed water is readily available and available for drinking. We buy an immense amount of bottled water, and for every 1.5 liter bottle, we use 5 liters of water to make the package to hold 1.5 liters worth of water. Another thing that shows that we don't really care is that we have a crisis. So in 2019, at the end of 2019, remember the big water crisis in Manila? So we turned off the water to all the poor people. And then we had a couple of rainstorms, we had a couple of typhoons, everything filled back up, and it all disappeared. That problem is still there. We're not really doing a lot to change the way that we use water. We're not doing much on producing more usable water. So, you know, there's this attitude towards it. Now, if we look at traditional water and sanitation and hygiene development done by government and development agencies and NGOs over the last 70 years, it's been a huge failure. The amount of failures of water systems is around 50–60%, and those water systems that are still working don't have any capacity to cope with expansion or catastrophic failure. And the reason for this is that traditional WASH development is infrastructure focused, and the messaging about water and sanitation is about health, and people don't care about their health. They fundamentally, health is a bad way of messaging to get people to change the way that they behave. So what has changed in the Philippines, particularly in government systems in the last 17 years, that's contributed to an improvement in implementation of water and sanitation projects and services? And basically what it is that we've realized that WASH is not about pipes or pumps or wells or toilets. It's about people. It's about creating demand. In other words, when we create demand, we want to change the behavior so that clean water is important to us. Using a toilet is important to us. We want to make sure that we have a governance system in place. And the last speaker talked about governance in a holistic point of view, but what we have to look at, and also the first speaker talked about governance, is how it's changed and how the system's changed. But governance is the relationship between the community and the government. It's about the two entities working together to figure out what's important and how to fix those issues. And then the third part of it is supply. And supply is about infrastructure, but it's also about management. It's also about operations and maintenance. It's about protecting resources. So traditionally, we've worked in the supply side, infrastructure only. And as you can see, the intersection previously is very small. So if you want to improve WASH service delivery, you have to work in all three. You have to create that enabling environment. You have to have a governance system that prioritizes water and sanitation. You have to create the demand for it. You have to change the behavior of the community so that they prioritize water and sanitation as part of their living experience. And then to service that, you need to have effective supply systems that are appropriate to the conditions that we have. Those conditions can be the environmental conditions, they can be the geological conditions, or they can be the capacities of the communities that are trying to access those services. So if you look at the three areas, they each drive each other. So if we look at the governance side of it, let's look at government. It's about people, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it's the civil society sector, taking responsibility for service delivery. It's about ensuring equitable access. And this was a key point in the first presentation. if you live in Manila, if you live in Tondo, you pay 8 to 15 times more per liter of water than if you live in Makati or BGC. You want to make sure that it's an appropriate priority and investment for LGUs and service providers. And then you want to make sure it's regulated so that you can maintain equitable access and quality. On the demand side, you want to make sure that WASH is a household, community, and government priority. And that manifests itself in investments and practice. We want to change the social norm. So for sanitation, we want to make sure that open field defecation is not a social norm. It's frowned upon. And so when we create demand, we don't talk about health, we talk about emotions. What we try to do is we get people to understand that open field defecation is disgusting. They should be afraid of open field defecation because it can harm their children. They should take pride in having a clean environment. And so behavior change is based on emotions. And then on the supply side, you need appropriate solutions. So you need to make sure that the solution fits the situation that you're in. There's nothing wrong with rainwater harvesting in an area that has sufficient amount of rain. But if you're in an area that doesn't rain a lot or has a long period of drought, you need to find other sources of water. You need to manage your resources. So you need to manage the watershed as well as the systems that you're using to transport and treat water. It includes capacity development, and it includes operations and maintenance. And so as you can see from this diagram, demand can actually drive governance. So if you make WASH a political issue and you convince the politicians that this is important to you, then they will prioritize that in their agendas for development. The government can then generate demand at the community level through their barangay health workers and through various policies and methodologies so that people change their social norm. And of course, if you have demand, then supply side will want to fix that. So let's look at how that has happened, particularly in the Philippines. So if we look at the Department of Health Administrative Order 2019-54, this was developed by the Department as a way to meet the goals and objectives of the 2010 Sustainable Sanitation Plan. I'm just going to look at two specific areas of it. One, FATS, which is the Philippine approach to sustainable sanitation. What we want to do is be able to measure our progress. So basically, we have 4 measurable levels of sanitation coverage at the barangay level. We have specific verification and certification processes. And this phased approach allows barangays to climb the ladder and celebrate success. And the key implementation process is behavior change, and then working on the supply side. So if we look at what that looks like, G0 is an area where there's open defecation. G1, that means there's 0 open defecation and people have access to toilets. So that means that the behavior has changed. G2 is where all households and public institutions have toilets. And then G3 is where you start talking about water sources are protected, sewage and septic management, drainage, etc. So as a barangay and as a municipality, you can measure your progress, and this allows you to put your investment where the biggest issues are. The second part of the guidelines I'd like to talk about is the implementing mechanisms. So you have to set up systems within the local government. If you look at government and WASH, it's very fractured at the upper levels, at all levels of government. So there's not one specific department that's actually focused on WASH. Department of Health talks about sanitation. They talk about water quality monitoring. The Department of Interior and Local Government looks a bit at governance for WASH. DPWH looks at the infrastructure development. DENR looks at watershed protection. So what happens is that everybody points their fingers at everybody else. So no one takes responsibility. So what we've done through this FATS policy and what we've done at the local level is create governance structures at municipal and provincial levels to focus on WASH development. We make sure that they adopt national level WASH policies and develop local policies for the institutionalization of WASH development. The key point there is to institutionalize it so it becomes a part of their way of working. And then from that, you create this mechanism within the local government, and that mechanism then creates strategic investment and implementation plans to spend the money, align it with their comprehensive development plans, executive legislative agendas, their annual investment plans, and all their other development plans, so that they can actually invest in the priority areas to move them up that ladder for sanitation. And so this requires capacity development at that local level and monitoring for updating of the sectoral plans. So you have a mechanism, you have plans, and you implement. So if I look at local government, because we live in a devolved governmental system, we don't have a specific WASH focal department within LGU. So we create a WASH task force at the different levels. Now, being a devolved government, what you want to make sure is that you make sure that what that mechanism does is appropriate for the level of government. So at the barangay level, they're implementers and operators and managers for small installed systems. So at the barangay level, they're less about planning, they're more about actual service delivery. But they can raise their needs and concerns through the municipal WASH task force within what we call a municipal WASH plan. Now, our municipalities are planners and implementers, resource mobilizers, legislators, and capacity builders. So they are there to provide that overall environment and assistance for the barangay so that they can improve their WASH situation. And then as you go further up at the provincial area, what they're doing, they're planners and resource mobilizers, capacity builders and networkers. And so they can help funnel the resources and capacities down through the municipalities. So within this devolved government system, you now have a way of getting the needs and concerns up, and it's measurable through the G1, G2, G3. And now you can get resources down because you have those plans in place. And so this is just a general overview of the whole process. So this is a lot of blah, blah, but basically you want to introduce the WASH governance approach. You want to set up the mechanisms within the LGU. You then go out and you do what we call a WASH inventory. So basically what you're trying to do is figure out what are the needs and what are the resources we have within the capacity, within the communities that we're serving. We then formulate that WASH plan, which is a strategic plan. We try to align that. We then align that with the various plans of the LGU so that it is actually adopted. And then from that plan, we create an investment plan and we develop specific WASH projects from that. And so then you implement the projects and then you look at the original plan and you monitor where you're at and you then go around and round in circles, and hopefully you tend to end up improving the WASH situation of your community. So that's basically how this works. So this is just the same thing over and over again. So to finish up, basically access to safe water is a human right. We all agree on that, right? So if we look at the human rights approach, we have the government and water service providers. They are duty bearers, while the community, the customers and constituents are rights holders. So both sides in a human rights-based approach have their responsibilities to ensure that we have equitable access and use the limited resources that we have effectively to move forward. Back to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think that was a very concise presentation and a very clear description of how the system can work. No? And we saw the importance really of putting it in place at the maybe municipal and or provincial levels. Of course, starting at the barangay and taking also into consideration a approach, no? As Kevin said, which is very important. The government realizes that they are indeed duty bearers and the rights holders, the people in the barangays, also understand their roles as rights holders. No? So I think with that, we've had the three basic presentations. Now we still have our two student reactors. As part of the tradition of these webinars, we really try to mobilize young people and students to be able to give their quick reflections and reactions. For this afternoon, we have our first reactor from Xavier University, Mr. Dave Gepalago, who is the Vice President of the Philippine Society for Agriculture and Biosystem Engineers of Xavier University. This is the chapter there in Cagayan de Oro with XU. Dave, can I ask you to take the floor and give your quick reactions?
Hello, good afternoon. Am I audible? Okay. So, good
Go ahead.
afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. I am Dave Gipalago, and I am honored to engage with the valuable insights shared by our distinguished speakers, highly experienced speakers today on the critical topic of sustainable water for food security, health, and nutrition. So to begin with, I'd like to give thanks to Dr. Pell for sharing with us insight about the interconnectedness, relationship between the social justice, fairness, and equity in the distribution and access to water resource within the Metro Manila area, particularly to rural-urban water distribution. Indeed, water is scarce and is truly a challenge on how to manage the distribution, especially that in times of drought, our farmers are being considered so-called secondary priority, which result to revenue loss due to reallocation of the water to household requirements and also to the leakage. Additionally, I'd like to stress how the privatization of water providers significantly improved the service coverage. But the question still remains, does poor household has access on quality water supply? Furthermore, second speaker, Mr. Pedro Bueno, your perspective on sustainable aquaculture development and the blue economy sheds light to the crucial role that marine fisheries and aquaculture play in biodiversity conservation, food security, and economic growth, all while embracing sustainable practices. It is evident from your presentation that issues such as overfishing, unsustainable practices, and the looming challenge of climate change are matters of grave concern. However, in the context of the blue economy, there seems to be a promising avenue for addressing this concern. The blue economy framework allows for the mitigation of these issues, offering opportunities to minimize their negative impacts and safeguard our marine ecosystem from overexploitation. Moreover, it is also opportunities for development of more social enterprise. Additionally, it was kind of a new knowledge for me, personally, about the integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, because same with what I know in integrated agriculture, it follows similar principle of minimizing inputs, thus reduce production costs and also promote sustainability. Moving on to the final topic presented by Mr. Kevin Lee, I want to express my appreciation for your practical assessment and experience you have shared regarding collaborations with local government on water, sanitation, and hygiene for the WASH initiatives. It is evident that many health issues are really close linked to inadequate water quality, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, sir, that ending open defecation is a crucial step in preventing contamination of our water bodies. In any case, I am confident that this program, the WASH initiative, has the potential to significantly improve water quality condition through the implementation of various policies and guidelines focused on proper sanitation and hygiene. Moreover, I believe that by harnessing the support and resources of local government units and even into the barangay level, this program could be effectively scaled up and implemented more extensively. To end my part, as an EBE student, my studies have underscored the crucial role of water in every aspect of our lives and the pressing need to conserve our precious water resources. I strongly believe that water conservation is a collective responsibility that transcends every corner of our country, as everyone must grasp the significance of water and the repercussions of life without a safe water supply. This realization has sparked my concern, prompting me to suggest that perhaps it's high time for our policymakers to really recognize the importance of water conservation by incorporating it as a core subject within our educational system. Such a move would equip the younger generation during their formative years with a profound understanding of what is water, as emphasized by my instructor, who happened to be a hydrologist, who stressed that understanding must precede effective water management. So this educational emphasis can empower them to become stewards of our water resources and advocates for sustainable future. And that's all. Thank you. And once again, good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dave, for your intervention. It's very useful. Thank you for summarizing also some of the issues that we have just heard from you this afternoon. Now, for our second and last reactor, I'd like to call on Ms. Mitzi Salcedo, who is the Sustainability Officer of Ecoteneo from Ateneo de Davao University. Mitzi, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting the Ateneo de Davao University. So I would like to share some points to ponder, which these points are localized in Mindanao or in Davao region. So I would like to highlight, amidst all the promising or benefits of blue economy, the blue economy should not come at the expense of marine conservation. So the Philippines has made efforts and become known with its established marine protected areas and create and implement regulations to combat destructive aquatic activities like illegal fishing and overexploitation. But there are more works needed to ensure sustainable resource management. Take, for example, infrastructure projects here in Davao region are concerns for the Samal Island Davao City Connector Project. It's a flagship project of Build. It is a bridge connecting the island garden city of Samal to Davao City and directly destroying a conserved coral reef. In their environmental impact statement report, the selection of criteria was arbitrary and left little consideration to the environment and social aspects. Only 10% weights are given both for the environment and social, and this selection does not give justice to the environmentally critical area and protected area status of Barangay Lizon, Marine Protected Area, and Samal Island as per Presidential Proclamation in 1981. Ironically, the MPA is recognized in the Comprehensive Land Use Plan, but the infrastructure development marched its way. The concern of this major development issue is not just turning of the reefs to crumbles, but the imperceptible displacement of the livelihoods of fisher folks in Davao and Sabang. Balancing economic development with the protection of marine ecosystems is without question But in the context of equity, the distribution of economic gains and benefits has to be persistently challenged. May it be in the distribution of water, acquisition of resources, employment opportunities, name it all. Moreover, part of empowering communities in sustainable maximization of aquatic resources is identifying their sources of water or where do these communities extract water. The presence of declared protected watersheds, or may it be sub-watersheds, plays a significant role in the preservation of their water sources and its quality for domestic and irrigation use. Aside from capacitating communities to sustain aquatic environments, water resource management has to be strengthened with water governance, since there are issues in geopolitics, especially in terms of water scarcity and even saltwater intrusion. In the efforts to support sustainable water resource management and water sanitation and hygiene is the creative and considerate exploration of energy options. Mindanao has been consistent in just an energy transition targets by aiming to utilize all available renewable resources, wherein resources that are considered quote-unquote renewable must satisfy the ability to renew, regenerate, or replenish at a higher rate than they are consumed. The Center for Renewable Energy and Appropriate Technologies of Ateneo de Davao University vision a renewed Mindanao through its renewable energy transition efforts. Primary innovation initiatives are the deployment of solar panels and biomass utilization to rural communities, but for coastal with open sea waters, tidal waves eyed as potential energy source by harnessing the motion of seawater. Harnessing ocean's ecological services is integrating ocean renewable energy systems into aquatic resource management. So to end my sharing, aquaculture and the blue economy in the Philippines have immense potential to contribute to economic growth and food security while preserving the country's aquatic resources. However, this potential must be harnessed responsibly through sustainable practices, community participation, and effective governance to ensure a prosperous and resilient future for all stakeholders. Thank you to all and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mitzi Salcedo. Very well put. I think that's a very good ending to our inputs this afternoon for your putting emphasis on the importance of sustainable development on the one hand, while being able to look at the issues of development, no, and the threats to development, see how this can be done responsibly, both by local governments and by community participation. I think, as you mentioned, that it is very important that when we look forward or we move forward, we have to be able to balance everything, no? Look in balance so that the sustainability for future generations is not compromised. We have to remember that in all this. So maybe with that, I'd like to thank all the speakers, from Dr. Phil Torrio to Mr. Pete Bueno, to Mr. Kevin Lee, to Dave Gepalago and Ms. Mitzi Salcedo for your brilliant interventions and insights this afternoon. I know you're all coming from where you've had your experience, and which is a very rich and varied experience, which is a good contribution to this webinar. In the interest of time, I'd like to just say that we have received very few questions from the audience or from the YouTube stream and from the other social media channels. But there are 2 points which I'd like to take as part of the question and answer part. No? There was one question raised earlier, is that does the Philippines have a national water use policy? Obviously, the answer is none. We don't. No? We don't even have a national land use policy, much more a water use policy act, if you like. No? So there's no strategic view on this at the moment, unfortunately. There was another question that was raised. What are small-scale water systems that home enterprises can utilize in their food production? I believe this was directly answered by Mr. Pete Bueno in his presentation, particularly when he spoke about aquaculture. No? Aquaculture can be done by at small scale, and it can also be put in small spaces. No? For example, a 1 square meter space, if these are done, let's say, in urban poor settlements, it can be done. No? You can have a small aquaculture tank made of plastic with a frame, and on top you can put your, we can plant some leafy vegetables, which can be eaten for sustenance, for on a day-to-day basis. So this is probably the cheapest and the most self-sustaining mechanism that we can suggest for small urban poor communities. There have been a few other questions, but which are more complex and more of an environment of climate change type of question, which can be handled in a future webinar, which we're doing on when we look at the issue of food waste and food and the environment, no, later this year. So I think I'm going to stop there for the question and answer period, unless there's something else in the chat box. I did not. If there's nothing, we can just proceed. Carl, can we move on to the next part? Carl wants to do a group photo for those who are here. Can we request you all to please open your cameras? There are probably a few slides, for this part of the program for our for posterity. If you can please open your slides, and you can have the group photo now. Carl?
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you again for joining. Please open your camera so that I can do the screenshot. Okay, counting from 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'll do it in 3 batches. Okay, another one. 3, 2, 1. Okay, another one. All right. 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you.
Okay, Carl, can we proceed to the next part of the program? After. So, can you please flash that slide? Okay, so Carl has shown you what are the remaining 2 webinars we're going to be hosting. On October 17, the day after World Food Day, we are doing a webinar on policy and governance of sustainable food systems, but focused on land and food systems. We will look at the issue of land tenure, agrarian reform. We're going to look also at the issues of value chain and sustainability. So this is this is also we're going to look at it from a regional perspective, bringing in other people from other regions. This will be done with the bigger land coalition network that the Asian NGO Coalition is working on. They will be our primary partner for this webinar, and it will be moderated by Mr. Ruel Rabanera from Xavier Cagayan de Oro. The last one is then Carl would like to show a short invitation for climate for this program on climate justice. Carl, can you go ahead and show that?
Baliktarin Mo, a youth-led movement for climate justice using the arts. Baliktarin Mo is the local adaptation of Turn It Around flashcards for Education Futures, a global initiative that creates a card deck which showcases what changes the youth hope to see in environmental policy and education. Each card contains an artwork on one side and text on the other. Last year, Turn It Around Southeast Asian Edition was jointly organized by the Artist Literacies Institute, the Arizona State University, UNESCO's Future of Education Initiative, and the ASEAN University Network on Ecological Education and Culture, or AUNEEC, hosted by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. This year, AUNEEC, and with various departments and units of Ateneo de Manila University, as reported by the Sandbox Residency Program of Arete Ateneo, are all organizing Baliktarin Mo, the Philippine adaptation of Turn It Around. Anyone from the Philippines under the age of 30 who has attended an activity of AUNEEC, the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and Baliktarin Mo partner institutions may participate by submitting an artwork and/or a piece of writing. The process of participation has 3 phases: experience, reflection, and action. Participants will first undergo an immersive learning experience conducted by a Baliktarin Mo partner institution. These activities include nature or sustainability walks, AUNEEC workshops, Sustainable Development Solutions network events, roundtable discussions, research projects, and field trips by the Biological Organization of Ateneo Senior High School. Based on the attended activity, participants are invited to reflect on our current environmental realities and consider whether the activity led to challenged or reinforced beliefs, guided new ways of understanding the world, evoked emotional responses, realized future actions, or led to the articulation of hopes and dreams. And then, from these reflections, create artworks or written pieces. Artworks must answer any of the following prompts flashed on screen. Here are some examples of artworks from the Turn It Around website. Submissions may also be in the form of written pieces that answer any of the prompts flashed on screen. Here are some examples from Turn It Around. But submissions are not limited to artworks and written pieces. Participants are invited to submit outputs that promote climate action and/or environmental conservation using any medium that they feel can communicate best their sentiments. Remember that our goal is to capture the voice and dreams of the Filipino youth for our environment. Focus on your own insights or reflections and let your own voice be heard. Selected submissions will be displayed in Arete's Sandbox exhibit by the end of 2023. The final deck of cards will be produced and distributed to selected schools for their use in their classroom and to policymakers and other institutional leaders in conferences and gatherings. Submissions are accepted until September 30 at go.ateneo.edu/baliktarinmo submission. The full mechanics are also accessible through the link and the QR code flashed on screen. Baliktarin Mo. We are excited to receive your submissions.
Thank you very much, Carl, for flashing this video and as a way of inviting everybody to participate in that event. And the deadline is September 30. Maraming salamat. At this point, I would like to request Dr. Emmanuel De Locado, who is the country manager of the Social Development Solutions Network Philippines, to give the closing remarks. Eman?
Thank you, Sir Edgar. It was indeed a loaded 2 hours of discussion talking about perspectives on sustainable water for food security, health, and nutrition. This bountiful webinar was organized by the Working Group on SDG 2 Zero Hunger Project. Needless to say, we have been facing challenges in addressing targets 2.1 and 2.2, which aspire to ensure access to sufficient and nutritious food all year round by all people, in particular, those in vulnerable and unfortunate situations. And water, clearly, is an integral component of those two targets. In this session in particular, we looked into the convergences of food and water, public health, sanitation, resource management, among others. Fortunately, we have members from the academe and CSOs who update our baseline information on different facets of food security and water, and who innovate in the ways in how they engage communities. For this afternoon, we have heard from our resource speakers, Dr. Torio, Mr. Bueno, and Mr. Lee, who articulately shared with us their insights and experiences on water and policy. We also thank our reactors, Mr. Gepalago and Ms. Salcedo, who shared context from their own communities and experiences on how we can further enrich our discussions on water sustainability. As we draw this webinar to a close, we extend our utmost appreciation to Sir Ed Valenzuela for being our moderator this afternoon. Thank you also to the numerous offices and departments of Ateneo de Manila, Ateneo de Davao, and Xavier University, who generously extended support in organizing and promoting this event. SDSN Philippines is clearly thankful to all of you. We are celebrating SDG Week 2023 this year as we face the challenges upon us and as we embrace in meeting the goals by 2030. We hope for the continuous collaboration and support of everyone. And of course, we thank everyone for attending the session, and we hope to see you in the further activities of SDSN Philippines. Salamat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eman Belocado. We will now flash the assessment link for the evaluation form. Please fill this up if you need an e-certificate, as well as to be able for us to send you the presentations from the participants, from the 3 participations. Please do this now. Thank you. Okay, with this, I think I would like to just thank everybody. I hope you've gotten the evaluation link and we can formally close the webinar this afternoon. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.